The killing of Palestinian civilians is not a collateral effect of the war. This Israeli assault relies by design on mass and indiscriminate killing of civilians. The humanitarian catastrophe in Gaza is not the consequence of a war. It is a tool employed by Israel to pressure people and force them out. The famine underway is not an undesired outcome of the war. It is starvation as a method of war. The collapse of the health system is not an unforeseen result of a war. It is the result of premeditated attacks against hospitals and medical personnel. The indiscriminate killing, the mass arrest, filmed humiliation of Palestinians, enforced disappearance and abduction, and summary executions aim at terrorizing the Palestinian people as a whole. This is an assault by atrocities, a full-fledged assault on 2.3 million Palestinians, besieged, bombarded, displaced, starved. For over 80 days now, 2.3 million Palestinians have been fighting for their life. From dawn till dusk, from dusk till dawn. Every single day for 80 days. There is undeniable evidence, multiple confessions of the criminal nature of this assault and of its criminal objectives, the destruction of a people to force their displacement. This is why peoples around the world, states across the globe, moral voices are expressing outrage and calling for an end to the massacres. Mr. President, what do you say on behalf of a people enduring a genocide? On behalf of a people blamed for their own deaths by those killing them, blamed for the oppression they are subjected to by those occupying them. On behalf of a people facing an existential threat, while those responsible for this threat insist it is their survival that is at stake. The killers demand apologies from those criticizing them for their crimes. They demand political, financial, and military support from the allies they humiliate and dismiss. They demand from their victims to be grateful that they have not imposed on them even more death and destruction, and demand from the world, witness of their crimes, to recognize they are the most moral army in the world. Israel considers that the problem are those denouncing the crimes, not those committing them. It openly attempts to bully them, intimidate them, silence them. To try and justify the unjustifiable, Israel invokes a history that condemns them, principles that they breach. They invoke the Holocaust to justify the mass killing of innocent civilians, a shameful use and abuse of the memory of 6 million innocent victims. We honor the memory of the victims of the Holocaust and all victims by upholding international law, not justifying its breach, by saving innocent lives, not justifying indiscriminate killing, by refusing to have different sets of laws applying based on the identity of the perpetrators and the identity of the victims, not by promoting supremacy and discrimination. Mr. President, this Council has called for protection of civilians, for immediate, safe, unhindered and expanded humanitarian access, for the delivery of humanitarian assistance throughout the Gaza Strip, for respect for the laws of war, and it has rejected forced displacement, all of which require an immediate ceasefire that this Council has been prevented to call for repeatedly. Israel has reacted with disregard and disdain. Why are they getting away with murder at this unprecedented scale? Because they were never held accountable. That is why they confess to their crimes. That is why they steal our lives, our land, our resources, our money, our past, our present, and our future in broad daylight. Mr. President, one day the massacres will stop. But how will we get over it? How will we get over the mass graves? The inability to bury our loved ones, to offer them a dignified burial, seeing them in plastic bags? How will we get over 1,000 Palestinian children amputated without anesthesia? Can you hear their screams? Can you feel their pain? Can you imagine if they were your own children? How can we get over 8,000 Palestinians under the rubble? Those who were blessed to die quickly, and those who endured a terrible and terrifying death, a slow death under the rubble while we were unable to save them. How do you get over a genocide? We will be asked, nevertheless, despite all that we are enduring and all that we have endured for 75 years, to move on, to count our dead one more time, to count our wounded, our permanently disabled, the people scarred for life, the millions of victims, and move on. We will be asked to be peaceful. We will be asked to be grateful that this horrible chapter among so many other chapters, even though this one is the worst one we have gone through, is over until the next one begins. This is the ultimate expression of double standards. The other side is never asked to move on if Israelis are killed, never asked to be peaceful in such situations. This is the ultimate expression of racism, of dehumanization of our nation. We shall all be subject to the same rules, to the same expectations. We should all have our humanity recognized and respected. Those who have dared till now to find a way or another to justify what is happening in the Gaza Strip will have to endure shame forever. For those calling on our people not to seek vengeance, not to resort to violence, they must support our efforts to deliver justice. That is the path we have chosen, justice, not vengeance. But till now, that path has been obstructed in the face of the Palestinian people, and no one has ever been held accountable for the crimes committed against them. Israeli impunity cannot be allowed to survive this assault. So finally, Palestinian survivors can live with the sense that the massacres will not resume. The horrors this impunity has led to will continue occurring until this is brought to an end. Mr. President, the world is discovering the true Gaza while Israel is destroying it. They discover as Israel destroys our university and schools that we have one of the highest literacy rates in the world. They discover as Israel destroys our historic mosques and churches that we have religious diversity and a Christian community in Gaza that is an integral part of our history, our present and our future. The world discovers the name of brave Palestinian journalists and doctors as they learn they were killed. They discover about a young Palestinian generation that was able to be creative and to perform and to try to lead a life in impossible circumstances, only to face death once again. The world discovers human beings who, despite repeated assaults and a decade and a half of blockade, somehow preserved hope, cultivated it, built their homes to see them destroyed, built them once more, saw them destroyed once more, built them again, built their lives despite loss and suffering. From within the ruins, they were able to rise again, only to face death once again. They found a way back to life, only to see death and destruction haunting them once more. Until when? That is what Israel is attacking. Hope. That is its greatest enemy. The fact the Palestinian people have not relinquished hope. The ability of our people to resurrect. They want to make sure that Palestinians in Gaza have no homes to return to. They want to make sure they have no life to return to. They want to make sure that life in Gaza is no longer possible. With one aim, what they call voluntary migration. Voluntary. 21,000 people killed, half of them almost children. And by the way, we mentioned the children and the women. Many innocent men have been killed. Voluntary migration, the code name for forced displacement, These are the options for Palestinians: destruction or displacement, death or displacement. Mr. President, in Bethlehem, Jesus' birthplace, celebrations were cancelled. But in reality, the message delivered and embodied by Jesus was celebrated by standing up and speaking out for the Palestinian people in Gaza, for the oppressed, as he would have done, those who suffer, as he would have done, those who endure, as he would have done. Bethlehem itself endures its share of pain and suffering, mutilated by a wall, and like all cities and villages of the West Bank, victim of constant attacks by settlers and occupation forces. The reality that the Christians of Palestine are enduring is unbearable. It is the same that all Palestinians are enduring, including in the Armenian quarter in occupied East Jerusalem, where they are fighting for their identity and their existence. Mr. President, the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, at the occasion of the report released yesterday on the West Bank, stressed that, and I quote, "The violations documented in this report repeat the pattern and nature of violations reported in the past in the context of the long-standing Israeli occupation of the West Bank. However, the intensity and the violence and the repression is something that has not been seen in years." End quote. These 3 months have been the deadliest in the West Bank, the deadliest the West Bank had witnessed in decades, including for children. But don't worry, Israel will attack the UN for reporting on its crimes, instead of putting an end to them. There is a war underway against the Palestinian people as a whole, against our existence in our homeland, against our identity, our history, and our future. Mr. President, Netanyahu expressed a few days ago his pride to have prevented the independence of the Palestinian state, to have undermined and destroyed the peace accords. He is bragging that he is destroying peace in our region. He is bragging openly that he has been obstructing the chance of peace. And by doing that, he has been undermining the security of both the Palestinian people and the Israeli people. His intentions have always been clear to anybody willing to look. He has been one of the main protagonists of the war for Palestinian geography and against Palestinian demography in the last 3 decades. Netanyahu's political platform is denying Palestinian existence and rights. His political survival requires a never-ending and ever-spreading war. Netanyahu continues rewriting history 75 years after the Nakba, saying that Palestine was a wasteland when over 1 million Palestinians lived in cities and had a cultural life and a political life and life, just life in that land, to justify prolonging the Nakba and attempting to finish the job. We have been down the path of negating existence, killing and destroying so many times before. We have been down that path for 75 years. Anybody thinks it's a good idea to continue down that path? Israel announced several times it had handled the Palestinian question. Netanyahu himself told the world a few weeks ago, here in the UN, there was nothing to worry about, raising a map that had disappeared Palestine altogether. Does anyone believe the matter was handled? Does anyone believe that more killing, destruction, and denial of rights will put an end to the matter? Recognition of our existence and of our rights and their respect is the only way towards shared peace and security. That is our goal, shared peace and security. Mr. President, how much injustice can a nation take? How much killing? How much humiliation? How much pain? Our suffering is not inevitable. It is man-made, occupation-made. The powerlessness of some world powers is not inevitable. It is self-inflicted. There is an international consensus. There is international law. They were not elaborated against anyone, but for the benefit of all. They need to be implemented. We remain committed to them, but they need to protect our people. We cannot only have obligations and be denied our rights, and the other side claims all rights for themselves and no obligations. That's not how international law works. It needs to be implemented, as we are witnessing before our very eyes what their breach leads to. Mr. President, as we approach the new year, 75 years have come and gone, and there is a nation still deprived of its land and of its most fundamental rights, still occupied, oppressed, and killed. Our people have outlasted the massacres before. They will outlast them once again. But those killed will not be brought back to life. Those scarred will never truly heal. The impact of the Israeli massacres in Gaza will be felt for decades. Of course, for the Palestinian people who bear the wounds on their flesh, but also in our region and across the world. And if hope is not restored and freedom does not prevail, no one can predict the next chapter of this tragedy. But everyone knows it will be worse. As the world welcomes a new year, the massacres in Palestine continue, the injustice continues, the suffering continues. How many Palestinian generations will have to suffer before finally being able to live in freedom and dignity and peace in our ancestral land? We want to stop seeing our Nakba grow and finally be able to see our children.